Hi, welcome to Mind Matters. Mind Matters is our opportunity to discuss the incredibly accelerating technologies which are re-engineering our society, our culture, and indeed ourselves. I am honored today to have Dr. Art Silverblatt, who's Professor of Communications with Webster University, to join me to discuss some of the implications as they relate specifically to individual behavior and our society at large. Dr. Silverblatt, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Kim.
I'd like to get into a number of the topics that we've been discussing at length the last couple of weeks, but before we do, I'd like you to discuss a little bit about the books, and especially those that are coming online as you're developing content that's being distributed internationally.
Well, all of the books I've been playing with have to do with the same subject, and it's media literacy. Media literacy is a term that may not be familiar to a lot of people, but a convenient three-word definition is critical thinking skill that you apply to the source of most of your information, that being the media. So part of what we do is we give people the tools, the strategies, so that they can make sense of the information that we're getting. We're buying things, we don't know why. We're voting for people, we don't know why. And so, you know, what we're trying to do is give people the skills so that they can develop an independence from what they're watching.
And I would propose that then media literacy by nature then is very tied to a true democratic process as well.
In many ways, yes. We're, you know, we're not teaching people what to think, we're teaching them how to think. And so, you know, we're not responsible for, you know, in some ways the product. What we really want them to do is to develop the tools so that they can support the interpretation that they develop systematically. And, you know, if they can do that, we'll be pleased.
Well, in that regards, then, we have a lot to talk about, especially when it relates to social media and the way that this upcoming generation seems to be vetting all their decisions based upon their own peer group. But we'll get into that momentarily. It strikes me that media literacy is becoming more and more important as a topic of concern globally. I believe the United Nations has had some input on that recently.
Oh yeah, UNESCO has just declared that media literacy is a fundamental human right.
That's a heck of a statement.
Yeah, it's huge. So, you know, countries throughout the globe are very attuned to this. They're very interested in the field. And so a lot of the work I've been doing has been more global, is working with, we're one of the books I've been doing years ago, and we're in our 4th edition, called Media Literacy Keys to Interpreting Media Messages. Sounds conspiratorial, doesn't it? But we're doing international editions. So we have co-authors from about 25 different countries who, that have translated the book into their language, but also have provided culturally relevant examples and quotes so that it's specific to the kinds of things that they're doing.
Specific to their particular culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. The book, by the way, I should say, is one of the chapters on digital media is co-authored by Kim Gordon. And the latest edition is actually I co-authored with 4 other people, and one of whom is a professor at Lindenwood, Andrew Smith. And so they're going to probably pick up on the future editions of this, I'm hoping.
The whole notion of media literacy, once again, has really been accelerating in my mind in recent memory, because as we get deeper and deeper into mediated society and culture, especially when we start talking a little bit more about augmented reality and things like Google Glass, it seems to me that we are getting deeper and deeper into the media system as opposed to gaining any kind of independent thought away from it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, you know, in so many ways, as you say, we're, you know, when you put Google Glasses on, which is that augmented reality, you are stepping into the computer. So you're seeing the world from the vantage point of the computer. People will be, and I would encourage people to YouTube it. There are, you know, samples that that they're more than happy to show you. But when you put on Google Glasses, basically information is superimposed over the reality that that, you know, that we had been living in. So it will give you information, for example, about the buildings or the streets or whatever. There'll be music. You ask questions and things will be voice activated coming up. And so in many ways, you'll be looking out at the world rather than looking into the computer.
Yeah, so let's talk about augmented reality, because it is fast and furiously coming down the pike. Google Glass is but one iteration. There's multiple iterations that we're seeing coming out of the technology marketplace. And we haven't really even heard from the think tanks at this point. So I'm certain there's all kinds of interesting things going on. One of the projections I saw not too long ago is within 5 years, we'll be able to do it not with glasses, but with contact lenses. And now we are really up to our eyeballs, so to speak, in the machine. Well, one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is a multiple fold. First of all, the minute you put on a product like a Google Glass and you're looking at reality through a mediated reality, in fact, there's an overlay, if you will, you have to question who is providing that mediated reality and what is their intent.
Right. Right. Yeah, one of the keys, one of the strategies that you want to get into is to look at the media communicator. Who is the person that is constructing the message? And so if you're in a world in which you've got this constructed reality, you have to ask that question. Who is responsible? What is the purpose, the function behind the reality that they're presenting?
What is their motive?
Absolutely. What is their motive? There is an old literary term called willing suspension of disbelief. When people are reading fantasy, science fiction, you willingly give up your suspend your disbelief.
You choose to believe the fictional world that can't even possibly exist.
Right, and we need to apply that same notion to a lot of the world that we're seeing, our mediated world. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the fantasy, science fiction, et cetera. But you have to make up your mind what you're willing to suspend with regard to your belief or disbelief. One thing that's very important about media literacy, I should stress, is that media literacy should not be confused with media bashing. Okay, in many ways, I think studying the media, understanding the media, helps you to appreciate what works well. I mean, we've all been to Mars. I mean, it's incredible the kinds of things that have happened. So, in addition to picking up on some of the issues, some of the problems that we see, it also helps you to appreciate what does work.
I don't think it would be any argument to propose that media as we know it today is going to be significantly different in 5 years. At what age should we start training children to be much more media literate? And once again, this is critical thinking, right?
Right, it's critical thinking. And it's so important that we do this, it's a survival skill. And people need to have the skills. If being an educated person means understanding your environment, our environment is being brought to us and through the media. So we need to really understand that as a way of getting to understanding our world. And so children, it's fun. I've done had a few experiences working with elementary school kids, and they can pick up on this stuff. A lot of the times, this stuff is not rocket science. If you pay attention to advertising, a lot of it is in the imperative. Buy it now, do it now. I mean, if people talk to you like that, you'd smack them. So it's not that it's that much of a mystery, but we're often distracted. We're thinking of other things, and so you don't think of it in that way. But if you're paying attention to what they're telling you, then you're in a better position to decide whether you want to suspend that disbelief or not. And and that would be up to you.
So one of the questions that I have as we move forward with this immersive technology, because some of the things that I've been noticing recently with my peer group and my friends and folks that have younger children, is I am seeing babies, a year-old, year and a half old, playing with iPads, playing with iPhones, and we have come a long way in graphical user interface design. It's very intuitive, and so it doesn't take long for a 12 or 24-month-year-old to be interacting with a machine as if they've done it their whole life. Well, I guess they have.
Yeah.
So what I don't really understand is at what point do we begin training them that this is not part of our natural reality, that this is an artificial construct, regardless of how natural the interaction is with this device.
Yeah, you know, one of the precepts is that media is a construction of reality. It is not real. You know, anytime that you insert a medium between you and another person, you're going to alter that reality. Look at, you know, wedding photos. I mean, is what goes on in your wedding album actually what went on that evening?
Anything to do with reality?
No, you hope not. You know, so once you realize that, well, then you're in a better position to kind of judge, and that's the important thing. But you know, when you talk to parents about media, and they'll say, well, you know, we really do not want our kids to have television sets in their room. That's inappropriate. So we just want them to go up and get on their computer.
They're on the internet.
They don't understand.
That's far safer.
They don't understand that, you know, there's an awful lot going on there. You know, I will tell you out there, you parents, okay, that your kids have seen things that you would rather they didn't. And it's not because they're out there looking for it. I mean, they can misplace a period. You know, they can put the wrong domain name rather than gov. You know, if you do
.com, yeah, you'll end up at a very peculiar place.
You wind up somewhere that you'd rather not be.
Yeah.
And so the kids are growing up differently. They're thinking about things differently. They're learning differently.
They're questioning things.
They're questioning things.
Yeah.
They're actually very good at research in ways that we were not. And so I'm not sure whether it's better or worse, but it is different. And so we have to acknowledge that. We have to understand parenting will be better. Will be, you know, considerably different.
Yeah, you keyed on an interesting phenomena that I've been watching, and I think within the last 5 to 10 years, we're witnessing what I call the Google research phenomena, in which, you know, in the old days, if you wanted to look something up, you'd have to either send off for it or go to the library, go through a card file. I'm showing my gray hair at this point, right? But we are in an arena in which if you have any question, you look it up and you have the answer instantaneously.
Right.
Now, the validity of that answer might be something that's suspect, but that's indeed part of what media literacy is all about, is understanding who is providing that information and then the value and how valid that information may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to start drilling a lot deeper into the augmentation of our world. As we drop ourselves into the machine, as I've said before, first we use machines, then we become machines, and then we are the machine.
So, I got this new family, and I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy all day long. Tap, 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 tap. Oh, and she even talks to it. She talks to that more than she talks to him. What's up, bro? Nice shirt. Who's she talking to? Her mom? She talks to her mom a lot.
Turn here. There. Excuse me. So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Hi, welcome back to Mind Matters. We're going to get back engaged with Dr. Silverblatt because we are now beginning to explore the whole arena of how media literacy can be used as a tool for us to discern the messages as they relate to us on a daily basis, especially as we start dropping deeper into the machine. So, Dr. Silverblatt, we're talking a little bit about the keys. Could you elaborate on that for me a bit?
Sure. Basically, these are qualitative approaches they're lenses that you can hold up. That's probably the best kind of analogy we can talk about.
It's a way to filter through the world.
Absolutely, yeah. So you hold up a lens and you see what you see, and depending upon the lens, you can see entirely different things. So, for example, audience, understanding who the audience is. There is, I try not to use too much jargon, but there's a manifest or a surface audience, and then sometimes there's a latent audience, which are sort of under the surface. You can apply these to different media. In fact, I had students talk a bit about social media and applying some of the keys and seeing what made sense. And one of the students was looking at it from the perspective of audience. And it was so interesting. She was looking at Facebook. Mm-hmm. And so she held that up and she said, well, who's our manifest audience? Well, the manifest audience are my friends. And so she got into that notion of what friends are and what they're not. And that whole issue, which is so I think fascinating.
Yeah, and volatile as well.
Yeah. And then she said, but you know, the latent, the under the surface audience is myself. And so she was talking then about what a narcissistic medium this is.
How observational of
yeah,
her.
well,
Wow.
and that's what this does, is it stimulates, it gets you thinking about things in a new way. So she was saying essentially, she would post an image of herself and she would look at it and say, I wonder how everybody will like me in this.
How many people like her?
Yeah, so she's looking at it as though she is her own audience. And then, what did I have for breakfast? Fascinating issues like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Timely stuff.
Yeah, so none of that really would have gotten, discussed had she not sort of applied that key. But you can use other keys as well. You can be, some of them that people are more comfortable with some than others. Sometimes the information lends itself, the medium lends itself to certain kinds of keys. Worldview is an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Basically, you ask yourself, what kind of world is being depicted here? And in fact, what you find is that in advertising, often it's not the product that they're selling the worldview. So you have
the acceptability of whatever lifestyle.
Absolutely. Yeah. The beer commercial, and everybody's frolicking on the beach with the mate of your dreams and having a great time and wonderful music. Well, and there's a cooler full of beer there. Well, if you airbrush out the beer, you're still having a good time.
Yeah.
But what happens then is that people will say, well, let's have a party. Who's bringing the beer? Mm-hmm. Because they make it central.
Equate the two.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they tie it to identity. Often. So the person that is modeling the product is the person that's the center of attention. Those kinds of things that when you look at.
As an aside, I'll interject this, but I just read recently that there is a growing percentage of Facebook users who have passed away. And the ability for anyone to get into those accounts and turn them off is very, very difficult. So most people don't bother. And so when your uncle or your aunt or your parents pass away, that Facebook account could be up there in perpetuity, in which, again, now we really need to reiterate the whole notion of being the ghost in the machine, because now truly they are ghosts in the machine.
Yeah.
But in such a scenario, who is the audience for the person that has passed away? It gets very peculiar very quickly.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about media literacy as it relates to development. So it is now recognized by UN. Right. We are globally attempting to educate people so that they're a little bit more observational in their approach to media. I know you've had some conversations with parents as teachers. Mm-hmm. When do you think we should be talking to children about media literacy as we get deeper into this augmented mediated world?
Well, I think the earlier the better. I mean, I've had success with third graders. The key that works best for them really is production elements. I mean, they're attuned to information. And so I did a lesson for some third graders where I showed the beginning of Jaws. You probably remember where somebody there, it's an underwater shot, and they've got that John Williams music that, you know, that, yeah, that kind of thing. I won't go into. So I played that, and then I played the same footage. I did the same visual, but I superimposed. You can't do that in an audio way, but instead of the soundtrack, I put in a Strauss waltz.
Okay.
And so what you found was, in fact, when the kids saw different things, they saw choral formations, they were more relaxed because the music encouraged that, you know, and they picked up on it. So in fact, what you can do then is you can get them thinking critically. What I found is that it's a lot more fun for them to sort of to develop critical awareness than it is simply to sit there passively and watch. And so nobody likes to be the patsy, you know. And so if you're talking to the kids and you say, well, now you're developing this media literacy, they like that, you know. It's fun. It's much more fun than just, you know, sitting there being an observer.
One of the things that I propose to students all the time is, as we get deeper into this mediated society, you're going to end up being one of two things. You will either be a user, which means that you'll just push buttons and be entertained or sold to, or you'll be the architect. And media literacy, I believe, gives you one of those avenues in which you can be the architect. Now you're really critically evaluating the information that you're receiving, but you're also capable of critically creating new media that can be distributed globally.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because not only are we consumers of media today, but this is what's really interesting about what's occurring in the last 10, 15 years, we are also originators.
Yeah.
And there's some remarkably very interesting things up on YouTube at this point.
Yeah. Well, you know, the whole communications model has been refined. You know, the basic communications model is interpersonal. You know, you have a communicator who has a message and is using a channel or a medium to reach the audience, you know. And then came along Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan is the one who said the medium is the message. And what that really means, at least to me, is that the medium has sort of moved up on that in that model, so that you have the medium is in many ways determining who the communicator is and what the message is and how people respond. Now we're in the digital communications model, and because of digital media, the audience has moved up, so that it assumes sort of a priority. The medium, digital media, determines who the audience is, and from there who the communicator is, and very last in the little compendium there is the message.
So exactly. It's becoming second.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's the individual who's creating the message becomes the message themselves.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and so what happens then is that the audience can circumvent the gatekeeper, you know, the old radio station. Well, now you go
Especially
on,
with YouTube.
Pandora. Absolutely,
right.
Yeah. You create your own, and a lot of younger people are finding it, watching YouTube and watching other kinds of things that they're creating and friends are creating much more interesting than the sort of tired, formulaic network television.
Yeah, I actually had an individual who was very, very interested in Photoshop. I said something to the effect, well, you probably ought to hit one of the colleges or local community colleges and pick up a Photoshop class. And the answer immediately was, oh no, there's plenty on YouTube. I can learn just as adequately and faster on YouTube, and it's self-paced and it's tailored to my needs.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact of all of this mediated culture on education. We'll do that in another show, but I really would like to have that conversation. So one of the things that I've been noticing, and we'll get back to YouTube here, is we seem to be in a society and culture in which crackpot is becoming normal. And by that I mean the splinter groups, the very radical thinking, the fringe thoughts are all finding commonality or acceptance by a large group of people that would have never, ever been exposed to this stuff in the past. how does that relate to anything that we've been talking about? I'm not even sure how that plugs in, honestly.
Well, God told me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Crackpot. Well, there's an old term. I'm sorry. There's an old term, breaking through the clutter. And that has become more and more of a challenge because there's more and more clutter. So one of the ways that you have to distinguish yourself is just to be a little bit more out there, and that's where the eccentricity. If you want to be commented on, you've got to say something that is unusual and
or controversial.
And the thing about the old print form is that you did have some legitimacy. You could look up, you could see who these people are. But
well, it costs money, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't print a book unless you had at least a few bucks in your pocket. Now you can print a YouTube instantaneously, camera and iPhone, and you're online. You're real. At least you're perceived to be real.
Yeah, and there's one of the things that we do not have anymore is reflection time. There's information really about stages in terms of spirituality, and you go through several stages, and the last stage is reflection. And what's interesting about our mass-mediated world is that that's what we're missing. All of us have been to the movies when you've been to a film and it's moved you in some way, and I'm sure this happened to you. And you remain in the theater and you're watching the credits go,
yes.
And you're and you're just letting it kind of like
thinking it through.
Yeah. And you don't care who the best boy is or the gaffer or anything, but you're letting it kind of happen. Yeah. Well, contrast that with television. Okay, a lot of these shows. Sitcoms are morality plays. They still are. Used to be Leave It to Beaver, and they say, well, what did we learn this week? In essence, well, be true to my community. Don't lie. etc.
Don't rock the boat.
Don't rock. Yeah. Also. But now, they get to that end part and they say, what about it? And be true to your community. And then immediately the screen splits, and it's coming up next, and things are scrolling underneath, and they're trying to move you to the next show. They don't want you to leave. And so what they deprive you of is that reflection time.
Right.
They're taking that away from you. So one of the things that I think is a good thing to do is, even if you're going to remain on that station for the next show, turn it off. Just for a minute or two, just turn it off and just kind of see, did that program move you in any way? Think about it.
Yeah.
You might want to have a conversation with somebody as a result. Then you can turn it back on.
Yeah, the incidence of people actually sitting and discussing these thoroughly is becoming impossible to pull together. Although it's kind of like an old-fashioned book reading, right? Where people can sit around and discuss. Perhaps we ought to be looking at things like that as a community involvement in order to get people a little bit more engaged in understanding what it is that they're actually reading.
Yeah, well, here's another crackpot idea, man. Cultural insulation, okay? We now know more and more about less and less. So what happens frequently is that you can assemble your own front page.
Right.
You can create your own radio station. You can do all that. And so in the old days when you had broadcasting, Ed Sullivan Show, when you had a variety show, they would alternately thrill and bore everybody. But they needed to appeal to everybody because they didn't have that big a mass audience.
Yeah.
Well, now with this kind of meta reality, everybody is kind of splintered off, and so people will like a certain kind of music, or you can not just be a sports fan. ESPN can make money by attracting not everybody, but every sports fan. Okay,
right.
But now they're into every. You can attract every soccer fan. You can get even more specific.
You can splinter the audience all the way down to a very select group.
Yeah. So how do you talk to each other when you've got that kind of those frames of reference? At minimum, it kills cocktail conversation, and at maximum, it splinters your culture.
Okay. I'm sorry to say that we're at a wrap right now, but we're going to get back to this. I'm not going to let him go. Mind Matters is our opportunity to discuss these things at length, but we are in the middle of a massive revolution. We've seen more change in the last 10 years than we've seen in the last 1,000, and it's accelerating. See you next show.